there has never been more self-improvement content, yet most people today are not improving. They're consuming the feeling of improvement. You read books, watch self-improvement videos, save quotes, binge podcasts, highlight paragraphs, and you walk away thinking you became wiser, sharper, more disciplined. But your life did not change even by 1%. This is the new addiction of our era. Self-improvement without self-transformation. You feel productive because you learned something, but learning was never your bottleneck. Execution was. And the more you learn without acting, the weaker you become. You build a mind full of information and a life full of inaction. Knowledge without application becomes sedation, not empowerment. Most people don't know this. They think they're progressing because the content sounds like growth. But in reality, they're stuck in a new form of entertainment, a high-level, intellectual, self-help flavored escape from responsibility. Today's lecture is going to break that addiction apart. You'll understand why your brain loves improvement content, why it resists implementation, and how to build a system that forces execution. It will not be comfortable, but it will be liberating. I broke it down into 10 points. Let's get right into it. So for context, self-improvement has become a lifestyle brand. Aesthetic morning routines, Ashton Hall went viral. Book stacks arranged like interior design pieces. YouTube thumbnails with red arrows and the word discipline. People use the language of growth without behavior of growth. Modern self-improvement is comfort disguised as ambition. It's a way to feel like you're working on your life without risking failure, discomfort, or embarrassment. Because consuming information is safe. You can't fail while listening to a podcast. You can't be judged while reading a book. You can't embarrass yourself by highlighting a paragraph. Every piece of content you consume becomes a tiny psychological pat on the back. At least I'm doing something. Except you're not. Learning is passive and growth is active. And the harsh truth is that 90% of what people watch, read, and save is a substitute for taking responsibility. When you consume too much, your brain begins to confuse understanding with mastery. And that's the root of the problem. But there's science behind this, and it's quite uncomfortable. Your brain does not reward implementation. It rewards anticipation. When you watch a video on productivity or discipline, your brain releases dopamine because it anticipates a better future for you. The brain rewards the idea of change, not the change itself. Dopamine fires because learning triggers fantasy of improvement, and that fantasy is enough to satisfy your emotional hunger for progress. So you get the reward without doing the work. This is why self-improvement content is so addictive. You get all the chemical satisfaction of progress with none of the effort or discomfort. It's safe, it's easy. The brain is lazy but brilliant. It will always choose the cheapest path to reward, and learning is the cheapest reward available. Here's the loop most people are stuck in. Consume self-improvement content, dopamine spike, feel temporarily inspired, do nothing, feel guilty, consume more content to relieve the guilt, dopamine spike, repeat. This is the pseudo-action loop. You're moving psychologically, but not physically. You're becoming more educated, while your habits stay exactly the same. Your mind evolves, but your behavior doesn't. And transformation only happens when behavior changes. This is not the only trap though, there's another one. The more you learn, the more exhausted you become. Mentally though, not physically. When your brain processes large amounts of information, it generates cognitive fatigue. It's a real, measurable, biological effect. And cognitive fatigue feels like work. Your brain interprets exhaustion as evidence that you did something meaningful. You read a chapter, you watched a training, you wrote notes, you listened to a podcast, you feel accomplished. But you didn't do anything in the real world. This is the illusion of mastery. You believe you're leveling up because your mind is full, but skill is built through repetition, not comprehension. Reading about discipline is not discipline. Understanding productivity is not productivity. Knowing the signs of habit formation is not a habit. The brain doesn't care. It checks the did work box because the cognitive load was high. But your life doesn't change because you never cross the threshold from comprehension to execution. There's a gap between what you know and what you do. That gap is the size of your entire unrealized potential. Most people stand on the edge of that gap and they never jump. They wait for motivation, they wait for clarity, they wait until they feel ready, or they wait for the perfect plan. All waiting does is widening that execution gap. Every day you consume without executing, your brain becomes more convinced that learning is the solution. That's how the smartest people stay stuck. They think the answer is more information, more knowledge, more research, more strategies, more clarity. But clarity only comes from acting, not studying. Most people don't have a knowledge problem. They have a courage problem. They think they need more information, but what they need is exposure to discomfort. So here's the paradox that no one talks about. The more you learn without acting, the harder it becomes to act. Why? Because your mental standards rise, while your behavioral capacity stays the same. You fill your mind with elite level concepts, but your habits are still beginner level. The gap between who you think you are and what you actually do expands. And that creates internal friction, a tension between your intellectual identity and your lived reality. This tension erodes confidence. Every time you consume more than you act, your self-trust weakens. That's the real danger of excessive self-improvement. It creates sophisticated thinkers and powerless doers. The real reason you don't apply what you know isn't laziness, it's not lack of discipline, it's not genetic, it's threat detection. Your brain perceives change as danger because change introduces uncertainty. Uncertainty threatens survival. Learning feels safe, action feels dangerous. So your brain pushes you towards more learning and away from execution. This is pure evolutionary wiring. When you try something new, post content, enter the gym, start a business, change your routine, the brain anticipates risk in the form of judgment, failure, embarrassment, wasted effort, loss of time, loss of identity. Even if there's no physical threat, the brain still reacts as if danger is present. Self-improvement content solves this through simulation. It lets you imagine change without risking anything. That's why people binge entire courses and do none of the exercise. The fantasy alone is enough to satisfy the nervous system. But if information were the answer, every intelligent person would be unstoppable. But the most intelligent people are often the most paralyzed because they drown themselves in analysis, theory, and planning. They crave the feeling of understanding. And the smarter you are, the easier it is to rationalize inaction. Smart people build better excuses, better stories, and better self-deception. They think their problem is complexity when their real problem is simplicity in the forms of action, repetition, embarrassment, failure, discomfort, and exposure. These are the ingredients of transformation, and most people avoid all of them because they hurt. Self-improvement content hurts no one. It's painless progress, which means it's not progress. Most people accumulate knowledge like trophies. They measure their growth by how many books they've read, how many concepts they can explain, and how many frameworks they've memorized. You know more, but you are not more. Capacity is built through repetition, failure, and discomfort, not just the information. And this is the first real shift you must make. Stop asking what you should learn next. Start asking, what should I practice next? A man who masters one concept through action outperforms a man who understands 100 concepts in theory. This is a twist on the famous Bruce Lee quote. The man who practices one kick 1,000 times is the man I fear more than the man who kicks 1,000 kicks one time. Information is potential and capacity is power. And you will only build capacity by engaging reality, not consuming ideas about reality. Every behavior change has a threshold, a psychological point you must cross before action becomes natural. You can consume content forever and never reach that threshold because execution requires exposure to discomfort, and the brain resists discomfort until you force adaptation. To cross the execution threshold, you must do the one thing that your brain hates. You must act before you feel ready. It's the same principle behind cold plunges, first reps in the gym, publishing your first video, launching a product before it's perfect, and speaking before your voice stops shaking. You cross the threshold by confronting resistance and not by eliminating it. Self-improvement content does the opposite. It teaches you to seek clarity, comfort, and confidence before action. This is neurological sabotage. Clarity comes from acting, comfort comes from repetition, and confidence comes from proof. Execution is the catalyst. Learning is the supplement. But the execution gap is not a failure, it's a skill deficit. Here's a psychological truth. You're not inconsistent, you're unskilled at execution. The beautiful thing is that it can be trained, improved, and made automatic. The problem is that execution is invisible. No one teaches it directly. We teach habit formation, motivation, productivity hacks, and time management. But execution is primal. It's the ability to force movement despite internal resistance. Animals have it, warriors have it, builders have it, and athletes have it. It's not a mood, it's not inspiration, it's not motivation. Execution is the ability to override hesitation. You build the skill only through repetition of action under discomfort. Self-improvement content will never build it for you. It can only explain the concept. So let's get into the anti-consumption protocol. This is one of the most powerful psychological tools you can implement. No new learning until you execute the last thing you consumed. So what you learn in this video, you execute first, then you watch the next one. If you read a book on habits, implement one chapter before reading the next. If you watch a video on discipline, practice the exercise before watching the next. Because otherwise you'll be reading books and by book number 10 you've forgotten the first 3. That's just replacing knowledge with other knowledge. You have to replace the knowledge with action. This rule alone will eliminate 90% of your self-improvement addiction. It forces constraint, it forces integration, and it forces proof. Your brain stops rewarding passive learning because you interrupt the dopamine loop. Instead of rewarding fantasy, you reward follow-through. This rewires your incentive structure. You begin craving action instead of knowledge. And this is vital because learning does nothing until you expose yourself. The brain cannot rewire through information. It only rewires through experience. Every time you face something uncomfortable, the nervous system adapts. It becomes less reactive, less fearful, and less fragile. This is neuroplasticity in action. The more discomfort you avoid, the weaker you become. The more discomfort you expose yourself to, the stronger you become. Discomfort is the tuition fee for every skill. Whether it's speaking, discipline, consistency, dating, execution, leadership, fitness, confidence, you pay the price up front. Self-improvement content lets you imagine paying the price without ever doing it. This creates a psychological debt, a tension between who you think you are and what you've actually done. The only way to erase that debt is exposure. So let's look at the discomfort to action ratio. The only real metric of growth is how often you act when you don't feel like acting. If the answer is rarely, you're not growing, you're merely learning. If the answer is often, then you're transforming. Self-improvement culture focuses on learning more over doing more. Because every transformation in your life will come from actions and not ideas. Ideas guide you, but actions build you. There's a psychological chasm between these two questions. What should I do? And what am I doing today? Most people live permanently in question 1. They collect frameworks, systems, methods, philosophies, and they never activate on any of them. The gap between knowing and doing is the void where dreams disappear, because all potential lives there. Potential that is never realized because the mechanism for converting ideas into action is missing, which brings us to the core mechanism of this lecture, the resilience application cycle. This is the system that converts knowledge into behavior and has 4 stages. First, you have to define the smallest executable unit. Not the theory, not the big plan, not the perfect routine, just the smallest action possible. Execute on it immediately. Not tomorrow, not after planning, not after feeling like it, not after preparing. Now. Repeat it until your nervous system adapts. Repetition is what transforms information into ability. Skills harden through consistency. Then you review them once a week, not once an hour. Overthinking kills momentum. Reflection is done in batches and not in real time. Look back after you've done it for a week. This cycle is what turns knowledge into identity. Not theory, not content, not consumption, repetition under pressure. The counterintuitive truth about implementation is that it feels terrible at first. It feels awkward, forced, clumsy, unnatural. But that's good because it means you're training a new neural circuit. You're living outside of your comfort zone. It should feel this way. The brain hates unfamiliar actions. It resists until you've repeated this behavior enough times to normalize it. Most people mistake resistance for a sign to stop. In reality, resistance is confirmation that you're doing the right thing. This discomfort turns into adaptation and then into automation. But why do you know what to do and you still don't do it? Because implementation competes with three enemies. Emotional resistance. The brain fears discomfort more than failure. Secondly, cognitive overload. Too much knowledge creates paralysis. Options become obstacles. And thirdly, identity mismatch. You have a mental picture of who you are that conflicts with the behavior you want. Self-improvement content doesn't solve these. It intensifies them. Because every new concept you learn without applying becomes another reminder that you're not doing what you know. This erodes self-trust, which is the foundation of discipline. A man with broken self-trust cannot be consistent. A man with strong self-trust becomes unstoppable. So the solution isn't less content, it's integrated content. You don't need to isolate yourself from learning. I'm not telling you to stop reading books, watching podcasts, and consuming self-improvement content. No, you need to integrate learning into your behavior. Every piece of content you consume must serve one purpose: to reinforce what you're already practicing. Information becomes fuel and not an escape. You no longer watch videos to feel productive. You watch videos to support what you're already doing. This rewires your relationship with learning. You become an executor first and a learner second. So the point is to rebuild your relationship with action. There's an instinct inside every person, a biological drive to act decisively under uncertainty. Most people lose that instinct because modern life weakens it. We're conditioned to avoid mistakes, seek comfort, outsource thinking, responsibility, wait for permission, wait for clarity, wait for motivation. The execution instinct decays through lack of use, but it can be rebuilt. And the fastest way to rebuild it is by forcing small, uncomfortable actions every day. Nothing heroic, nothing extreme, just enough friction to remind your nervous system that you're in command. Because action, even small action, is what restores authority over your own mind. Which is how you should realize that failure isn't the enemy, but passivity is. Failure doesn't destroy people. Passivity does. Failure actually produces data, it strengthens adaptation, it builds resilience, and it teaches you something. Whereas passivity, it brings delusion, fragility, internal rotting, anxiety, self-doubt, erosion of trust, and paralysis. You cannot build a resilient life passively. Self-improvement content encourages passivity disguised as preparation. You don't need more preparation. The perfect moment will never come. You only need more participation. You need to act now. Life rewards the man who enters the arena, not the man who reads about it. So the real cost isn't time, it's not attention, it's not mental energy. The real cost is lost years. Years spent learning instead of doing, planning instead of attempting, preparing instead of executing, optimizing instead of starting, and analyzing instead of risking. Every year you remain trapped in a self-improvement entertainment loop is a year where your potential stays theoretical. Potential that could have turned into a stronger body, a better career, a fulfilling relationship, a business, a skill, a new identity. But content consumption absorbs it all and converts it into nothing. And this is the hardest part, the ego. The more you consume, the more the ego grows. You begin to see yourself as this high-level thinker. You start believing you're above average because you know so much and you understand these concepts that other people don't. But ego without output is delusion. Knowing the path doesn't mean anything if your feet never touch it. Self-improvement content creates men who can talk about discipline, but they can't demonstrate it. They understand consistency, but they cannot perform it. They know the signs of habits, but cannot maintain one. They can explain resilience, but cannot endure discomfort. Self-improvement content creates men who can talk about discipline, but they can't demonstrate it. They understand consistency, but they can't perform it. They know the signs of habits, but can't maintain one. They can explain resilience, but can't endure discomfort. And you see these men by the boatloads, men who tell you what to do, how to do it, but you can tell they're not living by the principles that they teach. The gap between knowledge and embodiment creates a subtle and quiet suffering, because deep down, you know you aren't who you pretend to be. The solution is not shame, it's execution. So let's look at the inversion rule. Here's one of the purest systems you can implement right now. Invert the ratio of learning to doing. If you normally consume 60 minutes and act for 10, invert it. 10 minutes of consuming, 60 minutes of acting. This single inversion transforms your life, because learning no longer becomes the centerpiece of your growth. Execution does. You stop chasing insights and start chasing effort. You're using learning as a supplement to fuel execution. This inversion is so powerful that most people who applied for 30 days experience a surge in confidence, a stabilized nervous system, dramatic improvements in discipline, increased output, reduced anxiety, and reduced procrastination. I've coached people doing this because the brain finally gets what it needs: proof, momentum, and action. So here's the simplest way to operationalize everything so far. Micro action, macro transformation. Every large change in your life will come from tiny repeated actions. James Clear calls these atomic habits. It's a great book. I recommend you to read it. The mistake everyone makes is trying to overhaul their entire life in one day. New routine, new diet, new gym schedule, habit, mindset, identity. But this overload guarantees collapse because you want to do too much too soon and too fast. It's not natural. Instead, you should pick one micro action: 5 push-ups, a 10-minute walk, 1 outreach message, 15 minutes of deep work, 1 page of writing. Whatever it is for you, pick one of those things and make it small. Micro is sustainable. Micro bypasses resistance. It compounds, builds self-trust, and leads to macro in the long run. The transformation begins the moment you stop trying to become the best version of yourself and you start becoming the next version of yourself. So how do you force movement? Here's a psychological protocol you can use for the rest of your life. Shrink the action until it's impossible not to start. If going to the gym feels overwhelming, put on your shoes. If writing feels overwhelming, just open a document. If filming feels overwhelming, turn on the camera. If cleaning feels overwhelming, clear one surface. If working feels overwhelming, complete one small task. Action creates motion. Motion creates momentum. Momentum creates clarity. And clarity creates consistency. The hardest part is always beginning. As they say, when you want to go to the gym, for example, the hardest lift is lifting your butt off that chair. And beginning becomes easy when you compress the action to its smallest component. That's how you build momentum. You stack these small habits on top of each other, and before you know it, the micro turns into macro and your life changes. Let's look at different archetypes as to how they escape the content loop. The builder chooses one project and gives it 100 days. No new books, no new frameworks, only building, and he transforms. The practitioner, he studies one idea and practices it until he can teach it through results, not words. The warrior, he deliberately seeks discomfort. He exposes himself to daily actions that strengthen his nervous system, and he becomes resilient. The operator, he tracks behavior and not ideas. His life is measured through output and not concepts. The minimalist learner, he consumes content only when it solves a problem he encountered through action. These archetypes outperform everyone because they understand one fundamental rule. Execution creates superiority. Content consumption creates spectators. Here's your official system for escaping the trap. Learn the smallest unit. One tactic, idea, technique. Apply it immediately. Don't delay it. No theorizing right now. Repeat until adaptation. Rep it until it becomes natural, and then increase your progressive load, just like in the gym. Measure behavior and not knowledge. Only output matters. Number 5, consume again, but only when necessary. This loop makes learning a byproduct of action, not a replacement for it. And that's how you build a life. So let's look at what to do this week. 20-minute rule is what we're going to apply for 7 days. 20 minutes of learning, 40 minutes of action. No multi-concept overload. Pick one concept from this video, apply it daily. Daily micro execution. Choose one action, repeat it every day. At the end of the week, you review. Don't do it in real time. That's not how reflection happens. What did I apply? What changed? What resistance did I feel? And what will I double down on next week? No new content until you act. The actions will show you what you need. If you want me in your corner to apply these principles, you can book a free strategy call with me. It takes 30 minutes. It's completely free. And by the end of the call, you have more clarity. Tell me your next micro action in the comments below. If this video was helpful to you, leave a like, subscribe, click on the notification bell. See you in the next one.